Hello and welcome. I am Trisha Morris at Club Scrap, and this is the Triple Panel Book Project Part 1. This is your homework. So when we meet together to do Part 2, you need to have this part completed. And I think doing the homework ahead of time will take off some of the pressure because I do have a limited time frame in which to complete the second half of the project, and I wanted to take away the pressure. So to review, this is the Triple Panel book. It's got a really clever magnetic closure. It's made out of a folding board substrate and has these three fun areas to assemble. So a trifold area, the waterfall area, and then a accordion album inside a cleverly made pocket. All of this, of course, is made with our Flourish page kit. So the kit has been adapted away from pages. We're going to be turning it into this gorgeous book. Now, the kit comes with all kinds of goodies, the ribbon, and then your supplies also include the metal corners, the clasps, glue bottle, all of this stuff. You can literally set all of those little smalls aside. And then the rest of the items in your kit we can work with, except for you won't need these pre-cut photo mats. Those are going to be used at the end of the process to help fill your accordion album and everything else. I'll set that aside. And now I have just basically the larger papers. As with all Club Scrap projects, we typically put the paper in the order we're going to be using it. And since we're going to be trimming, let's grab that. I've got a Fiskars guillotine style trimmer. If you do not have this trimmer, I do carry them. I believe they're probably this is the foundational tool that you need to be really successful with our clever methods and our efficiency. Just pick up this trimmer and I promise you won't regret it. Even if you have a graveyard of unused, unloved trimmers, which I have, when I finally discovered this guy, it's definitely ideal. And then I'm also using my accordion pocket file. This is an invention of mine from many years ago that helps us stay organized. Do you have to have this for the project? No. Just maintain 4 separate piles in which to organize the pieces. And then when we assemble this in part 2, you'll just grab from each pile. That way we're not sorting through a big mess of papers that you have to make sense of later. Everything will be all organized and laid out beautifully. So if you want to make one of these for yourself, I do have a starter kit. I also have a video tutorial you can purchase separately if you need it. The tutorial comes with the starter kit as well. And I'm just going to place the lip of this underneath my trimmer base, and I even added some hook and loop closures there so that it's got some extra stability, and that way we can just organize right here and use very little horizontal space. Now it's time to sort these materials. So we're going to begin by trimming all of the folding boards. So you should have 3 sheets of this heavier weight folding board here, and I'm going to place them all on my trimmer base. The rest of the papers from the page kit, I like to hold them vertically so that I can easily sift through them to find the color I'm looking for. And the first color we want is brown. So from my stack, it was on the bottom. Not sure where yours is. Actually, we need 2 browns. So I'm going to grab the second sheet. Now there's another shade of brown here. We're calling that one Craft. So this is the really, really deep brown. 2 of those. Next, speaking of craft, let's find the 2 craft pieces. So dig a little here. You can see that's kind of like a grocery bag brown color. That's the Craft. Then let's take one of this dark green, and you can see that this side of the green has a deep texture and the other side is more smooth. So I'll just put texture side down at this point since we'll be flipping this stack over later. And then I'm going to grab a light green, then another dark green, and then another light green. Now prints. There's a print we're calling the wreath print. Let's grab that. That's what the wreath print looks like. Now, if you're substituting with a different collection, you just need to do a 1-for-1 substitution of all of these colors and prints. Putting that face down. Then a greenery print. So that's just the other one. So if you're, again, working with a different collection, just grab the other print. And that leaves me with 4 sheets left. Now we've got this greenery print, the wreath print, and 2 sheets of cut-aparts. These pieces will eventually be trimmed apart, but I'm not going to do that with you as far as the prep process, as far as I know. One thing to point out is before you start trimming the cut aparts, just trim right in the gutters between everything. Take off the outer perimeter here, just as indicated. So you've got that little guideline there. Just cut the edge of that off on all 4 sides, and that will take you to a perfect 12 by 12, and then you can start just trimming individual pieces, and all those cuts will line up on the nearest 1/4 inch. So it's pretty easy to trim this, and then this is what you will use to, on your own whimsy, decorate your book. And these can be adapted, of course, to the size of the book as well. Set those aside, out of the way, and take the stack that we've sorted, flip it back over to the folding board side, and set it to the left of the trimmer is typically how I do it. Now I'm turning to page 1 in my instructions, and we'll be doing some trimming here. Now this first step creates the center cover of our triple panel book, so it's a pretty easy cut here. We'll start out at 6.5 inches. Now a couple things to keep in mind. The top row of numbers here are centimeters. Make sure when you find 6.5 that you grow the number by going left from the number 6. So I always find 6, grow it by going left 2 columns. So that's 6 1/4, and that's 6.5, halfway between 6 and 7. Make sure that the folding board is flush at the very top of the piece, so it's nice and level and squared off. Then push down firmly on this guideline. If you don't have that push down, the paper can move when the blade comes down, and that will give you a crooked cut. No bueno. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and cut that. Again, the folding board is a little heavier. The blackboard is even heavier, so you really need to follow those steps. Now take the piece that it sits in your trimmer, rotate it so it's horizontal, and trim it at 9, which is the height of our book. Stabilizing again. This piece goes in pocket C. The other 2 pieces, believe it or not, are scraps and can be used later in the decorating process of your book. So I'm just going to have a little scrap pile up to the left and out of the way. And now I'm taking my next sheet of folding board. That wasn't so hard, was it? Now, before we can trim this, just be aware that this piece is going to end up being the left cover or front cover, and you'll see that this piece gets scored. It's really important that we cut this in cooperation with the grain so that we're not folding against the grain. So here's what I want you to do. Hold the paper by a middle and then compare it to what happens if you wiggle it from a neighboring edge. This is very stiff, like a platter. This has a little bit of flexibility. And so I want you to make sure the paper flexes easily from left to right. And let's find 7 3/4. So again, you find the whole number 7, go to the left to grow the number to 7 3/4. Stabilize firmly and slice. Now we'll rotate again here and trim at 9. Again, that's the height of the book, and that's your left cover. Since it needs to be scored, we're going to create a separate pile to go back to and score. So I'm setting that aside to my right. And then I'm going to take this little rectangle that fell off the end and trim it at 5.5. Place this in pocket C. And then you have a little scrap for the scrap pile. And the same is true for this long piece. Again, these can all be used as decorative elements in your book or for another smaller project if you wish. Now we need the final piece of folding board to create the right cover. Again, I want my grain dipping easily from the left to the right. So this is extremely stiff. This is a lot more flexible. So I'm going to trim this one at 8 1/4. Spent a lot of time getting these measurements just right. So 8 1/4. Rotate. And once again, trimming at 9 to get the height of the book. This piece will be scored, this large piece. So set it aside to your right or wherever your scored pile is. This is going to become a flap for a pocket and also needs to be scored. So I'm setting that in my score pile. And now we just have this long remaining strip as a scrap to be used at your will. Next, we're going to take 1 sheet of the brown, just one. You have 2 over, another one over here. And let's not worry about the grain direction. These pieces will not need to be folded. So we can just go ahead and trim at 11.5, 8 3/4. So again, growing the number closer to 9. We got 8 3/4. Rotate and trim at 11 and 5 1/2. Now take one panel and put it in pocket B or pile B. We've been filing already a little bit. And then the other one in C. Both pieces you made were the same size, so that goes in C. That will leave a little strip of scrap. You can set that in the scrap pile. And now this we're going to trim. So place horizontally in the trimmer and cut at 11 and 5 3/4. 5 3/4. This 5 3/4 inch piece, pocket A. There's a slightly shorter piece going in pocket C. And again, every time I say pocket, it might mean pile. Maybe if you have some Post-it notes or something, A, B, C, D, and then just put it over in that direction if you're substituting out. And of course, there are 2 little scraps remaining at the end. The other sheet of brown, we're not folding it, so we don't have to worry about the grain. Let's start at 8 3/4 and rotate to find 6 1/4. This will be placed in pocket A. And believe it or not, we have a scrap and another scrap. It's not really a scrap, it's going to be used later. Now, one sheet of the craft, of course I grabbed 2, so make sure you're grabbing 1. This time we need to check the grain. Oh, that's way flexible. And this time the paper should dip easily from the bottom to the top, or north to south, however you want to look at it. Our first cut on this is 8 1/2. Stabilize firmly. Slide to 4 1/4. The 2 pieces that are the same that you just created get set aside to be scored. So that's off to my right. And this final piece doesn't have a specific home quite yet, so don't worry about that. Scrap pile. The next sheet of craft, check your grain once again. I want it dipping easily from left to right, east to west. First cut here is 11 1/2. And then 6 1/4. 6 1/4. Rotate now and trim at 8 3/4. And this panel is used in pocket B, a rectangular scrap. This larger piece will trim at 8 1/2. And set this piece aside to be scored. And a few more scraps remain, just this smaller rectangle and the strip. Take this dark green and check your grain. And I want it dipping easily from the left to the right. And take the light green and do the same little test. That's more stiff. This is more flexible. Stack them neatly. We'll trim at the same time since the measurements are the same. We'll start at 9. And when you're trimming 2 sheets, the stabilization is so important, so don't forget to do that. And then slide to 4 1/2. This piece rotate so it's horizontal. Cut at 6. All of these need to be scored, so I'm setting them aside in my score pile. Just keep stacking. The next strip, same thing, we'll trim at 6. Set aside to be scored. Then you have a double strip here that remains, that can be placed in the scrap pile. The next sheet, make sure it dips easily from the left to the right and cut at 4 1/2. Rotate and trim at 6. These 2 pieces get scored. And this, believe it or not, is all for your decorating enjoyment. So put it in that scrap pile. Now I'm going to take this light green This time I want the paper dipping easily from the top to the bottom. Again, because this paper will be folded eventually, that's why it's important. Now this next one, I'm going to check the grain direction again and place it in the trimmer. Now I'm not sure how yours is gonna be, but I'm gonna avoid the words in this case because it gives it an orientation. I'm gonna go with this larger piece, this larger wreath on my left. Again, your grain might be different, so just do follow the grain as a priority. And we're gonna trim both of these at the same time at 8 1/4. Place these two larger pieces aside to be scored. And then you've got some decorating options with those scraps. We need to do the same thing with this final piece, so check your grain direction. Dipping easily top to bottom. Trim at 8 1/4. This gets set aside to be scored. And this is a scrap. That officially concludes the trimming for this workshop. So I'm going to get rid of my trimmer and grab my Score Pal. If you don't have a Score Pal, it's a super handy tool to have. Again, it's like having the basic requirement for the craft. This is a really helpful thing. And we do carry these and keep them in stock as well to make it convenient for you. But if you don't have one, make sure you grab one. Otherwise, you'll have to adapt and find ways to measure and put a crease into the paper. I do prefer to use a metal tipped stylus when I'm doing my scoring because I feel like I can engage the channel a little better and pull back more firmly, whereas the tool provided with this is made of plastic and it tends to wear out with excessive use, which I'm highly guilty of. I use my Score Pal all the time. Now, we are going to tackle the pile of things we had set aside in the order. It's kind of like a reverse order that it landed. I like to bundle my activities, right? So we did all of the trimming, now we'll do all of the scoring. Let's place the paper into the Score Pal, the top sheet, so that it fills it 12 inches across. I would say it's being scored horizontally. And we want the printed side facing up. And our measurement here is 5 3/4. So find your 5 3/4, engage. I hold the tool like I hold a pencil, not like this. Sometimes it just can cause some problems. This gives me a lot more control. So 5 3/4 on the score. Now I'm going to take this paper and flip it from the bottom to the top and score at 11 1/2. So that's way over here. And that's it. I'm going to set this just aside for a second and grab the next piece and score once again horizontally at 5 3/4. Then I'll flip and go 11 1/2. I'm gonna set that aside. And there should be one more the same size. These pieces make that trifold insert into the pocket. So 5 3/4, flip bottom to top, 11 1/2. All right, so you can take all three of these and place them into pocket D. Since they're 12 inches long, I'll just do it kind of at an angle. Don't try to shove them down into the pocket if you're using this. Now we have a big series of these pages. These are 4 1/2 by 6, and they all need to be scored vertically at 4. So place it in the Score Pal as straight as you can and score at 4. And I'm doing this with the textured side facing up. Just bring in the next guy, get them nice and tight in there so it's level, and continue on scoring vertically at 4. And while I'm doing this, I'll just say that the pressure that you apply to the paper should reflect the strength or the heaviness or the weight of the paper. And the light green, while these are both 80-pound cover weights, the light green maybe is a little more tender than that textured dark green. So just adjust accordingly. There. All of the waterfall pages are now scored and ready to be placed in pocket B. The next piece of craft we have in the stack should measure 5 1/4 by 8 1/2. This piece needs to be scored 1 and 1 1/4 inches from 2 short edges and 1 long edge. Basically, we're going to make a 3-sided pocket. So when I say 1, so I have it in here horizontally, 1 and 1 1/4. Then rotate, so now it's vertical, right? Then score again at 1 and 1 1/4. Now I rotate again. This is the other short side, 1 and 1 1/4. That's it. So now I have a 3-sided piece that will grow up to become a pocket, and that's going to be put in pocket A. That'll be one of the first projects we work on. Next, we have 2 pieces of craft that are 12 inches long. They're the same width. We'll score horizontally at 4 1/4 and 9 1/2. Same for the second piece, 4 1/4, 9 1/2. Since they're 12 inches long, when we file them in pocket B, we'll again do it at a slight angle, so it's sticking out like that. Now we've arrived at folding board. This is definitely a little bit of heavier product, so you're gonna want to score with more pressure. Try to avoid losing your engagement with the line. I'm gonna give you a quick tip on that in a minute as well, but the white folding board is slightly more scoreable than that heavier black, so I'm gonna give you a tip for that. This narrow strip, horizontally scored at 6 and 6 1/4. Now what you can do is just make a quick second pass over those lines to make your folding process a little easier. This piece goes in pocket A. And next, just confirm you're working with a piece that's 8 1/4 by 9. So here, the measurements, you can see them both on the score pal here, 8 1/4 and 9. The measurement is 6 1/2 and 7 1/4. It's going to give me a 3/4 inch spine. I'm making a few passes. If you are using the black folding board, or if you just don't feel very confident about your scoring ability at this point, I'm going to show you a tip where you use our acrylic grid ruler to help you stay in the line. So here's how I use it. I know my first number was 6 1/2, so I'm going to engage first with the tip of my stylus or your bone folder, whatever you're using. Then bring the ruler there so it's literally touching that, and have it level here at the top. I'm putting firm pressure down on the ruler. Then when I bring the stylus tool back, it'll help me stay right and engaged with that line perfectly. So use the ruler trick, especially if you're working with the black folding board, or if you just want to help increase your confidence. It works beautifully. This is going to be placed in pocket C. I have one more piece left. Let's double check our measurement on this one. It should be 7 3/4 inches here and 9 inches there. We'll score at 5 3/4. And I'm going to make a second pass. And 6 3/4. Making a second pass again. Place this in pocket C. Now again, if you want to, as prep, you're free to do so. You can go ahead and remove the perimeter from these sheets of cut aparts and trim them into sections, or just leave it all together along with your 2 other prints that you can use when you go back and decorate your album. You can even combine them with all the little scraps that you have of various sizes, maybe even arrange those scraps by size so that you can see what you've got and work with it. And I will tell you that when I finished my book, I had a tiny little remnant of little pieces left over because I did incorporate almost everything as layers onto all of these pieces. You can see just a lot of color being added. So you're going to have a lot of use for the remaining pieces that are in that quote unquote scrap pile. I used it for all kinds of things. So just be mindful of that and don't lose track of the rest of the pieces so that you have that as an advantage later on. Now, when we get back together again for the official part 2 of the class, we'll start with pocket A and just assemble each portion of the book in sections. It's going to go together beautifully. So I look forward to seeing you in part 2.